A few weeks ago, I went to New York to write. I'd been feeling overwhelmed with life responsibilities, and I had a day between projects that I planned on squeezing in some much needed writing time. I was hyperfixated on being productive. I felt I hadn't progressed and where I wanted to be regarding my personal goals, and I'd been putting pressure on myself to film more, post more, produce more online. So I planned out my day, I packed my notebook and a pen, and I went to the city early in the morning. I ended up writing less than 500 words. I truly felt that I had failed, that I had just wasted a day, an opportunity to create. Central Park was in the full swing of spring, cherry blossoms, tulips, wisteria. I stopped at practically every new set of flowers I came across, and it felt strangely monumental since my first short story was coming out in a few weeks in a literary magazine issue titled Blossom, and here I was walking through actual blossoms, reflecting on where I'd come in my writing. I'd planned to make a big productive writing vlog from this day, where I'd share the amazing progress on my novel and show all the cool places I visited. Instead, I spent 3 hours wandering Central Park, put down a few hundred words, and barely filmed anything else. Late afternoon, instead of trying to write again, I went to the Morgan Library. They have a Gutenberg Bible, which I had never seen one in person before, and I thought it would be a neat literary thing to do. I think it's funny, though it took me a bit to realize that it's funny. I'm writing a novel set in 1675 New England about a Puritan village, about themes around the long shadow of Christian belief. I'd been beating myself up all morning for not producing enough words, and I had stood in front of the literal physical object that made this part of history possible, that made my character's world possible. This book from 1455 sparked the mass production of scripture and put reading into the hands of ordinary people, and it broke a 1,000-year monopoly on faith, and I was worried about my word count. I grew up in a house where being unproductive was treated as a moral failing. Relaxing was a reward you earned for doing everything you needed to do first. Resting was like a treat, not something deserved. So when I got distracted in the park and just wanted to keep walking and enjoy the day, a little pang of guilt crept up that just grew throughout the rest of the day. I told myself I'd write later, whether at the library, at a cafe, on the train home, to alleviate the feeling that I could be doing better than I was at that moment. And I didn't write later. The words I had written weren't the best. They were hard to get on the page, and I felt self-conscious sitting in a public space trying to pull them out of my brain. I was fighting against an instinct to just enjoy the day. But giving myself that space, actually letting myself wander for 3 hours instead of forcing words onto the page, turned into the most useful thing I did last month for my story. Walking the park, I had the freedom to just let my mind wander, and I began to think about where I'd been making my novel smaller than it should be, why it felt difficult to get words on the page, why I felt uninspired when I had plotted this whole book out and I had been so driven before. And it dawned on me that I'd been too focused on writing the version that would hit expected plot beats in order to sell, instead of the story that I actually wanted to write, the perspectives with the details that I wanted to include. The version of the book I'm working on now is a little stranger, more specific, and more mine. And all of that came out of a day that I was very reluctant to let myself just exist without expectations. When I sat down to write this video, I immediately started listing all of the other things I'd accomplished last month to tell you that taking it easier this one day was all right because of everything else I was able to achieve. But that's the exact same logic that made me feel guilty in the first place. The day was worth it simply because it was. And I came home that night with a headache and 500 mediocre words. But I also came home with a novel that feels even more like my own. I'd like to say that I've made peace with the guilt of being unproductive, but I haven't yet. I do notice it now, though, in a way that I didn't used to. And I think that's an accomplishment in and of itself.